So what we were talking about last time is we were getting used to the CNS and the PNS, and then today we're going to do a lot of terminology. So let's start just here. And we basically said that the central nervous system is really composed of two organs exclusively, and it's what? Brain and spinal cord, exactly. And so what we were talking about last time is when you look at the brain, it's got gray matter and white matter, and gray matter is primarily the neurons, the cell bodies of the neurons, and the white matter is primarily the myelinated axons, the wiring that's connecting them. To show you, give you an appreciation of that, I love this figure. I've never been able to do this dissection successfully, but I want to. So you want to see the cable and the wiring that connects the left cerebral hemisphere to the right cerebral hemisphere. This is all just the wiring or the white matter of the brain that is connecting the two halves. And you can actually see, because they're individual like cables, you can actually see which direction things are going. That's the corpus callosum, is what it is. Huh? No, well, the whole thing is corpus callosum. It's just that this has a capsule around it. It's really hard to pull the capsule off without destroying the actual white matter of the brain. So yeah. So anyway, you can see sort of what the white matter within the brain looks like. White matter in the brain is called a tract or a pathway. Okay. So it's not called that when it's in the peripheral nervous system. White matter in the central nervous system, I should say, is called a tract or a pathway. And this just happens to be tracts that are going this direction. Now, when we get into the peripheral nervous system, it's going to be white matter too, but we're going to call it something different. Okay, so let's get into the peripheral nervous system now. Every single bit of other nervous tissue in the body that is not brain or spinal cord is considered PNS, or the peripheral nervous system. And you can see why it would be called peripheral, because it's off to the sides. Yes. And what is in the peripheral nervous system? Well, very few neuron cell bodies. The neuron cell bodies are sequestered in the central nervous system mostly, and that's pretty damn important because with very few exceptions they are amitotic. So they are sequestered in the central nervous system. They are encased in bone, either the cranium or they're in the vertebral foramen, right? And then you may or may not already know this, but they also have three protective membrane layers called meninges surrounding them. And then they also have cerebrospinal fluid surrounding them. So they are highly protected within the central nervous system, and that's where most of them are. Now, you do have a few neuron cell bodies in little blobs outside of the central nervous system. Here are a couple. These two right here. When you have a neuron cell body outside of the central nervous system, it's in a little blob called a ganglion. Plural is ganglia. They're usually really close to the central nervous system, and this one is actually even slightly protected by the vertebra, but you don't have anywhere near as many neuron cell bodies out there. Most of what is in the peripheral nervous system is just nerves. So now we have to look at what an actual nerve is. So here's the biggest nerve in the body right here. It's called the sciatic nerve. I want to do a cross-section and look at what's in the sciatic nerve. Okay, so what is in the sciatic nerve, if you do a cross-section, is primarily a nerve is myelinated axons coming from and going to neuron cell bodies that are elsewhere. Yeah? And so if you look up at the top, I can't reach, but do you look up at the top, you can see one axon right there? And then the axon has that myelin around it. And then superficial to the myelin, you have your first connective tissue protective layer called endoneurium. Yeah? And then you bundle a bunch of those into a bundle of axons that's called a fascicle. And you wrap that in connective tissue, and you call that connective tissue perineurium. Yeah? And then you wrap a whole bunch of fascicles with the blood vessels that are supplying stuff in there. Whole bunch of fascicles together, and you call this whole thing a nerve, and you wrap it in connective tissue called what? Epineurium. So it's the same pattern that you've got there. So what a nerve is a bundled, protected collection of myelinated axons. Yeah, that's primarily what it is. I mean, it's got a couple other things in there, but that's primarily what it is. So now, the axons individually, each of them is myelinated. Let's look at it a little closer. This is actually a close-up of the myelination this is an axon. This is the myelin that's actually surrounding it. and the endoneurion surrounding it. This is from the sciatic nerve. And then if you go up a little bigger, you can see the whole nerve. It's pretty cool, huh? Go ahead.
Are all those running one direction?
Yes, they're all running parallel to one another.
Well,
But the information is not running
Okay,
the right
that's-
direction. So that's the next thing I'm going to address. So that's a really good question. So let me get to her question, but we have to work up to it just a little bit. So we've got our layers, right? Okay, so hold on to your question for just a second and let me just introduce you to the nerves structurally and then we'll talk about what they're doing. Okay, so basically I want to do this dissection too. And I can actually do this dissection. I can't figure out how to preserve it so that it will stay like that. Like it needs to be kind of stuck to something. Because if it goes in a bucket, it would just floppy. So the dissection is not super hard to do, but the preservation, I haven't figured out how to do it yet. Okay, so what I'm going to have is I have the central nervous system. And the central nervous system is where everything comes from or goes to for integration, right? So in order for you to ever know, not even consciously, but even subconsciously, that a sensation occurs, it has to get to the brain or spinal cord. In order for a motor command to go out, either voluntarily or involuntarily, it has to come from the brain or the spinal cord. So I want you to think of the brain or the spinal cord like I-15 going through Utah, right? And every single freaking driveway ultimately has to get to I-15. Yes? That makes sense? Okay? Has to. So the teeny tiniest little driveways are like little bitty branches off of these nerves, and they're even smaller than this because you have to go to every single muscle fiber, for instance. So, but there are a limited number of on-ramps and off-ramps to the highway, yeah? And those have specific names, and you will learn them this semester. So basically, the on-ramps and off-ramps, the nerves that attach directly to the brain, the on-ramps and off-ramps directly to the brain are called cranial nerves. Cranial nerves. And there are 12 pairs of those. You will eventually, not in this set of notes, learn the names for all of those 12 pairs and the basic functionality of all 12 pairs. So 12 pairs of cranial nerves, and they come to and from the brain. And then 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So 31 on-ramps and off-ramps to the spinal cord. Yeah? Those are easy as far as naming because they are really just named for right about where they come off. Like for instance, you've got L1 through L5 spinal nerves that come right off the lumbar region of the spinal cord. So those aren't as hard. The cranial nerves have names and numbers, so they're a little harder, but there's only 12 of them, so you're okay. So what happens, let's talk a little bit about functionality here. And this is an oversimplification, but it's to make it make sense and be relevant, and there are exceptions to this rule. So the cranial nerves that are coming and going to the brain directly, mostly what they do is sensation from the head, like for instance vision and hearing, yeah, and motor activity to the head, like glandular secretion and also skeletal muscle contraction and blinking and that kind of stuff, right? So the cranial nerves are mostly doing head stuff, both sensory and motor head stuff. Is that good? And then as you start to move down to the spinal nerves, the best way to understand what the spinal nerves do is that the spinal nerves that are higher, they generally give sensory and motor innervation to the things that are right below them. And you can kind of see this right here. What actually gives innervation to your arms? It's coming from the cervical region of the spinal cord, mostly or maybe a little bit from the upper thoracic region. So stuff from here gives arm sensation. Stuff from here, usually the area that's right below it, like for instance intercostal muscle innervation coming from right here. Does that make sense? Okay. And then stuff from the lumbar region, you can see stuff that's leaving the lumbar region is mostly going to go to innervate your legs. And then your junk is mostly coming from the sacral region. Does that make sense? So let's reinforce that by talking about spinal cord injuries and the fact that where a spinal cord injury occurs can predict what loss of sensory and motor function you have. Okay, so you may or may not know this, but the spinal cord actually ends about L1. This isn't spinal cord tissue. So if I had a spinal cord injury that was really, really low, you can pretty much just anatomically see what you're likely to lose function of, right? So you can see that if I had a spinal cord injury right here, I might still have some innervation of the upper portion right here. if I have a spinal cord injury up here, can you see that I am probably going to be a paraplegic, right? Especially if it's a complete transection of the spinal cord. And that means that, and this is important, so because in order to get the sensory information to the brain or the spinal cord, you need to get it through this region. And the central nervous system tissue is mostly amitotic, so if you damage it, you're kind of screwed. So if I'm feeling something down on my toe and it's trying to get up through my sciatic nerve to tell me either consciously or subconsciously that something is happening, and the highway's out, man. It's gone. And you can't get it up there. Doesn't mean the sensory receptor is not being activated. It still can be activated, but it's not going to get through. The signal can't get through. Functionally, it can't get through. Likewise, if, for instance, I'm trying to tell myself to wiggle my big toe, right, and the information is coming from the voluntary portion of my brain, and I've got a spinal cord injury up here, it can't get to there. The road is out. And the unfortunate part about spinal cord injuries is the road is generally out permanently. Go ahead.
I had a patient that had her leg amputated, and after labor, she said she felt pain in her toes.
So this is a really interesting thing. We'll talk about this a little bit more in the next set of notes, but let's go ahead and briefly address it. Phantom limb pain. So if you had a spinal cord injury as an adult, right? Okay. What happens is, for instance, this portion of your spinal cord still has fibers that were attached to here. And if the fibers start firing, what happens is it's still attached to the part of your brain that says that is toe sensation, but it's no longer attached to your toe, right?
It was so painful though.
Yeah, and phantom limb pain can be super, super painful. There's some fascinating ways to treat it. There's one of my favorite new neuroscientists, his name is Siddhartha Mukherjee. There's been all kinds of things that they do to try to treat phantom limb pain after amputations. And one of the things that he found was useful is that you really just need the feedback that says that you are taking care of the pain. So let's say I'm a unilateral amputee and I've lost one foot, right? So part of how our brain knows that we're taking care of something is that you can actually see yourself like taking care of it or doing it. He set up a mirror box in which, so I'm an amputee and I continue to have phantom limb pain on this side. I set up a mirror box in which I'm feeling the pain and it looks like I'm actually attending to the pain here, and then the brain stops sending the signal. It was like a $30 mirror box.
Wow.
That he just sent home with people. That he just sent home with people after like decades of trying to treat it by all kinds of analgesics and neurosurgery and all kinds of stuff. It was like your body needed to close the loop. It needed to know that something was being attended to, and then the pain went away.
So you trick it.
Yeah, you have to trick your brain. Yeah. What? All you needed was placebo. You just need the appearance of somebody taking care of you. Go ahead. I'll get you next.
I was wondering, why is it everything else in your body can repair itself like that? What's the difference there?
Well, you lose your, do you know centrioles? Remember centrioles? And neurons lose their centrioles during development, so you have no ability for neuron cell division. You can't divide the DNA. Why they lose their centrioles, I literally have no idea. But they're not the only cells that do. Some neurons just, some cells just lose their centrioles during cell division. What was your question?
So with the phantom limb thing, what about the people who can't feel pain but they still have their limbs? I mean, that's pain receptors on.
Yeah, that's usually a neurodevelopmental disorder. We can talk about that when we get to the brain, if you hold on to that question. Because that's not usually out here problem, it's a here problem. Okay, so let's talk about a quadriplegia, right? So now start talking about damaging the central nervous system further up. You can see that you can lose sensation of motor activity in your torso. And when you lose, for instance, motor activity in your intercostal muscles, it makes breathing a little bit more difficult. The diaphragm's primarily in control of it, but the intercostal muscles help. If you damage it all the way up here, you can see that you will probably, C2, C3, you are probably going to be almost a complete quadriplegic, right? So all the way up there, like Christopher Reeve had those kinds of damages, like all the way up there. And you can just sort of see the anatomy of the loss of functionality by how far you go up. It's just the basics of anatomy. And by the way, like, can you see that right here? The arm is actually partially innervated from down here, but it's partially innervated from up here as well. So if you damage between here, you're going to lose partial function, right? You may have muscle weakness, you may have partial ability to contract, you may have sensation in some regions of your arm and not others, just based on their basic anatomy. Okay, so now let's go back to Nisha's question. So what are the nerves actually doing? Well, if you're looking at what nerves are doing functionally, nerves, so the individual axon, this is important because people confuse this terminology all the time. An axon commits to its functionality during embryonic differentiation. So you can have an axon which exclusively and always carries information out, and that will be a motor axon and never anything else. You can have a different axon which exclusively and always carries information in, and that will be a sensory axon and never anything else. But the nerve is, of course, a bundle of axons. So the question is, does a nerve have to, every axon being carrying information in, every axon carrying information out, or can they be doing different things, like highway, right? And the answer is that nerves can be sensory. A great example of a sensory nerve is a nerve that has so much sensation going on that it hardly has any room for motor activity, like the optic nerve. The optic nerve is exclusively sensory. All of the axons are carrying information toward the brain. So what about motor activity of the eye? Well, we just separate that out and carry that in the oculomotor nerves, right? Which are responsible for like eye movement. Good? Okay. But most nerves are not separated based on function. They're just bundled based on where they're going. So if I have a nerve that's going to the hand, I have tremendous need for sensation in the hand and also motor activity. So the nerve that's going to the hand will be mixed in function. Yes? Most nerves in the body are mixed in function. Almost all the peripheral nerves are mixed in function, thus branches off of the spinal nerves. That makes sense? Go ahead.
So sensory brings information
Into the central nervous system.
in, and motor brings
Information out from the central nervous system. Does that make sense to you guys? So, I don't think I'm lying. There's always exceptions, and there's limits to everyone's knowledge. By saying that all of these are mixed. And some of the cranial nerves are sensory, some of them are motor, and some are mixed. That makes sense? Okay. So, you guys kind of understand big picture? Okay, so here is what people do and what you can't do, and you're going to have to practice it to get over it. You cannot use terms interchangeably with the nervous system and get things correct. A neuron is different than an axon is different than a nerve. And you can't flip-flop them, right? Because, and what people do is that they're just not super familiar with the terminology, and they say neuron when they mean nerve, and they say nerve when they mean neuron, and they say axon when they mean dendrite. So that's just going to take some practice and some repetition. Generally speaking, people haven't used these terms very carefully in their past academic career, right? You may have said them, but you didn't use them carefully. So that's you're going to have some time before your test, right? It's not until March 7th or March 8th, but you're going to have to take some time. And so the next time I give you a quiz, which won't be until a week from today, it's going to have muscle memorization and nervous system terminology on it. And try to see if you're like starting to get the nervous system terminology. That makes sense? Okay, so now, does anybody have any questions? You guys all right so far? Go ahead.
Really quick. So I thought the definition of an axon was carrying information
Away from the cell body,
Okay.
not away from the central nervous system.
That's
Okay.
where cell bodies are located in the ear.
Usually. So now, that's a good question. It's an astute question. But that was assuming that you knew the anatomical structure of all neurons. And you don't. So let me just give you a preview. And sort of will reinforce that question. It's a good question. So what if not all neurons were shaped like this? What if some of them were shaped like this? And that could mean that the dendrites were way down there and the cell body was this direction, right? And then still, of course, the axon would be there. Yeah? Does that make sense? Right, exactly, because that's the only neuron cell type that we taught you, but there are other neuron types. Okay, so we'll reinforce that as we get to this will be the last thing that we do today. Everybody okay with that? Okay, so any other questions? With the nervous system, will you guys just do this? When you get confused, ask a question. Don't ask it 25 minutes later, because it's really easy to get lost in the woods if you don't pay attention to the first wrong turn that you take. So I really don't mind slowing down. When you don't ask questions, I assume that you're getting it. It may be a stupid assumption, but I don't have any other input to tell. So that's all I'm going to go on. But you can stop me. I don't mind. Okay, so now we're going to change gears just slightly and start talking about terminology related to the function of the nervous system. And we're going to kind of build something like this, but we're going to build it ourselves. Okay, so for right now, we're going to be talking about functionality of the nervous system. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on functionality of the peripheral nervous system. Okay, now, remember when we said the hand on a hot stove thing? Information in, information process, information out. So does it make sense to you that since the central nervous system does the vast majority of integration or decision making, that primarily what the PNS is doing is sensation and motor activity. Yeah, it's carrying sensations in, it's carrying motor activity out. It's primarily just wiring, right? It's just wiring to and from the central nervous system. So we have to get that terminology down. So first thing, before we get into super detail about this, let's talk about CNS and its relationship to the PNS, and then we'll break down the PNS a little bit more. And so my first question to you is this. Is communication between CNS and PNS one-way or two-way? Yeah, it's two-way, right? So I'm going to draw two arrows. And then the next question is top arrow or bottom arrow? Which one correlates to the word sensory? Which arrow, top or bottom, correlates to the word sensory? Top, yeah. Do you see information from the peripheral nervous system to the central nervous system? Does that make sense? Okay. So, and then the bottom one correlates to the word motor, right? Motor control goes from the central nervous system out. Sensory information goes from the peripheral nervous system in. So if we talk about our hand on a hot stove thing, right? From the peripheral nervous system, sensory function goes to the central nervous system. And the central nervous system does integration, right? And that is identifies hot, compare, assess, too damn hot, and then make a decision about what needs to be done. And then you send the decision back out through the motor. That make sense? Okay, now this whole integration process is super duper complex, right? Because sometimes integration is not just hand on a hot stove, but it's watching a presidential debate, right? So we don't talk about that yet in this semester, in this chapter. We'll talk about it in the next set of notes, okay? Which I'm not sure if I'm going to do before or after skin. I'll decide that in a minute. So integration is really complicated. What we're going to talk about today is the terminology that has to do with what the peripheral nervous system is doing. And that's a little bit more simple, right? Because it's going to be roughly divided into sensory and motor, right? And then from sensory and motor, you can have some subdivisions depending on what kinds of sensation and what kinds of motor activity, right? Okay, so with the PNS, we're going to concentrate on the PNS for right now. And we're going to do a subdivision of the peripheral nervous system. And we're going to say, okay, the peripheral nervous system, with very few exceptions, is either carrying information in or carrying information out functionally. We're not dividing it structurally, right? And so the word for that is, of course, there is a sensory division of the peripheral nervous system, but there's another word that you need to know for sensory, which is going to be used constantly from now all the way through physiology and even in clinical stuff. And that is the word afferent. I think of afferent as approaching. Afferent approach. Okay? And then I'll tell you the other side and then we'll go back to the sensory. The other thing that the the peripheral nervous system could be doing is sending information out, and that is called motor or efferent. Okay, so afferent approach, efferent exit. Yes? That's not what they mean at all, but it helps. And it's not the only body system that you will see these in. For instance, an artery that by definition carries blood away from the heart would be considered a what-ferent vessel? Efferent vessel. A vein that carries blood toward the heart would be considered an afferent vessel. Yes? So you're going to see this terminology all throughout anatomy and phys, but it's really important in the nervous system. Okay? By the way, I'm mispronouncing them so that you can hear the difference. Unless you want to sound like a redneck like me. They're actually pronounced afferent and efferent, but it's really hard to hear the distinction when you're lecturing and saying afferent and efferent. Sorry, say afferent and efferent. But when you're giving a presentation in the future, because you've got an illustrious career, you say afferent and efferent, right? Unless you just sort of okay with sounding like a redneck. I've just gotten used to it. Okay, so sensory. I want to further subdivide this. So everything sensory is gathering information from things called sensory receptors, right? Yeah? And you know sensory receptors. You've got your 5 special senses that you learned in kindergarten, right? I always forget all 5 of them. Sight, taste, smell, hearing, equilibrium. Those are the special senses. They're mostly head senses, okay? And then you have their general senses, which includes touch, temperature, pressure, pain, and one called proprioception, which you may or may not know. It doesn't really matter, but all of them are going to take sensory information from a sensory receptor and send it toward the brain. Yes? Okay, but we can further subdivide them based on what kind of sensation it is, based on where it's coming from. So you have the somatic senses, which is mostly sensation that occurs skin, skeletal muscles, bones, superficial stuff. Yeah? So that's somatic sensation. And then the other is called visceral sensation. And those are gathered from primarily your guts. So the stuff that's in your ventral body cavity, stuff that's inside your blood vessels, those are mostly visceral senses. So what about the special senses? I won't test you over this, but like your sight, taste, hearing, equilibrium, smell, what are those? Well, it's hard to really figure out which one they fit into. Most of them are somatic. The only one that's usually considered visceral is taste, because it's associated with your digestive tract. That's kind of an arbitrary designation if you ask me, and I never ask that. But just so you know, most of them are considered somatic senses. They're considered your special somatic senses. Go ahead.
I've heard before somatic nervous system used as like a blanket term. Is that for just the PNS?
It is somatic nervous system. When people say that, they're usually meaning somatic motor.
Okay.
So let me teach you that in just a second, okay? So somatic, so you're going to use somatic twice in this. This is somatic sensory, and the other one's going to be somatic motor. So, so our sensations, you've got sensory receptors tons of places, and you are going to either carry somatic or visceral sensation. And after we get all of the words down, I'll start giving you some examples to run through of this. So, by the way, what this means, by the way, I realized when I put it in there that most people don't know what an AP is. What the sensory, the entire sensory division or afferent division is doing is carrying information in the form of an action potential, an AP, which is an electrical stimulus. This time you're carrying it toward the brain. Now, if you don't know what an action potential is, you'll learn it in excruciating detail in physiology, but for right now, it's an electrical stimulus that travels along an axon. Okay, so that's what it's doing. So, and then, now, let's go to the efferent division, the motor or efferent division, and then we'll do some examples of this. The motor or efferent division also has a subdivision to it, okay? The motor or efferent division is all ultimately going to communicate with this collection of tissues that we call effectors, and you can think of them as things that you can effect a change on. You can make them wiggle or you can make them squirt, okay? Wiggle or squirt. I'm not saying necessarily voluntarily, but you can make them wiggle or squirt, okay? So these are called sensory receptors, and these are called effectors, okay? So subdivision going to the effectors. The motor or efferent can be divided into 2 divisions, and this goes to her question. The first one, first side is called the somatic motor, and somatic motor controls the only tissue that you can control voluntarily, which is what? Skeletal muscle. So another way of saying that, the skeletal muscle is the effector. Yeah? So skeletal muscle is the effector for the somatic motor. So when people say somatic nervous system, most of the time they're just leaving off the motor, which they should put in. But you talk about somatic nervous system with motor so frequently that people just end up leaving off the motor. So usually if people just say somatic, they're talking about this one, but I also have a somatic sensory. Okay, and then this one over here is the other branch. This is called the visceral motor, or there's another word that's used far more frequently, and that is the autonomic motor. Good? And this goes to the tissues that wiggle or squirt, but not under voluntary control. What are they?
Guts.
What?
Guts.
Guts, yeah, but tissues. Glands. You got 2 more tissues. Cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle. Smooth muscle, exactly. Those, yes. So the effectors for the autonomic nervous system are cardiac, smooth, and glands. Is that good? Those are the effectors for the autonomic nervous system. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 examples to sort of show you how this terminology is used, and see if you can figure out how to get me through using the correct words. So the first thing is, let's talk about that hand on hot stove example. Okay, so hand on a hot stove and the response to it until you fix it. Okay, so hand on a hot stove. The sensory receptors, right, are located and communicate to, they're located in the skin, correct? So that means that the specific type of sensation is going to be what? Somatic sensory, right, is going to go through the what afferent branch of the nervous system. Afferent branch of the nervous system, which is part of the peripheral nervous system, yes? To the central nervous system for integration. Central nervous system says too damn hot, sends out a signal, right? Again through the peripheral nervous system, but this time what afferent? Efferent, and it is going to go cause this to occur. So is it somatic motor or visceral motor? Somatic motor. To what effector? Skeletal muscle effector. Good. Okay. So let's do another example. This one's totally different. Okay. Now I'm going to go to Shannon Thai, which is the spiciest Thai place in town, and I'm going to decide I'm a badass and try to eat a 3 when I can seriously only handle a 1, and it's going to give me the squirts. Okay. You ready? So I am going to have the sensation of this severely irritating spicy food that is going to occur which branch? The sensory receptors are visceral this time, yes? They're visceral. And then they are going to go through which afferent branch? Afferent, right? Of the peripheral nervous system to my central nervous system for integration. And this time my central nervous system is going to say, too damn spicy, get it out, right? It's going to send the signal back out the peripheral nervous system, but through which branch? Efferent, yes. Okay. And specifically, what tissue is it going to try to end up at? Smooth muscle, yes. So how do you get there? Visceral or autonomic motor going to what effector? Smooth muscle. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, that's the terminology. And of course, it's going to take some practice to get it, right? But you can get it. Okay. All right. So everybody okay with that? Okay, I'm going to add just a little bit more detail. This part, it's okay if you don't get right now, because we're going to do a chapter on it later, but I want you to be introduced to it the first time, okay? So, and that is that the visceral or autonomic motor has a further subdivision. And this further subdivision can be confusing, so if you don't like it, you can stick your fingers in your ears and we'll get it later. If you do like it, then it'll make more sense more quickly later. There's a further subdivision of the visceral or autonomic that is sympathetic and parasympathetic. Like, I love this. This is my favorite. I'm just kidding. People like the nervous system after they're done with it. I don't like it during.
People use the terminology wrong so much in real life. So like you've heard all these words and you're like, I don't even.
Yes, it
I
is.
not learn them right.
Yes, you probably have not. Go
It's
ahead.
like when you found out that you were saying supposedly instead of supposedly.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's not supposedly.
For 20 years.
There's like new theories on language, that language changes and it's how you use it, so whatever way we're saying it now modernly is the right way, apparently.
Ultimately, it will still make you sound like a jackass, however.
Yeah.
And once you figure it out, you're like, oh. And I grew up, like, I'm first generation college student, and either side of my family, nobody has ever had a college degree before me, ever. And so I was a like super reader as a kid, and when you read a lot and don't talk to anybody who knows how to pronounce the words, you pronounce everything wrong. Everything. It was so humbling.
Yeah.
I got into a high school class and I kept saying anomaly. And she's like, what are you saying? It's like anomaly. She's like, do you mean anomaly? I think so, I don't know. What do I mean? Tell me what I mean. So nobody ever corrected me. Okay, so sympathetic, parasympathetic. I'm going to give you a preview understanding of sympathetic versus parasympathetic. And here is the preview. And that is that with skeletal muscle, just stick with me for a second, skeletal muscle has one nervous system hookup. And either you tell the cells what to do or they don't do anything, right? Like a teenager, exactly. You either tell them to change their underwear or they don't change their underwear. So you just have one hookup. But with the heart, just want to think about the heart for a second. You sometimes need to actively speed up the heart, and sometimes you need to actively inhibit the heart. So instead of the heart having one hookup, we actually have a gas pedal and a brake. Yes? With me? So there's two different hookups. There's two different things I can do to the same effector. Yeah? Okay, so the sympathetic is typically referred to as the fight or flight division of the nervous system. You use it during fight, flight, and exercise, and a bunch of other times that won't make sense now. Fight or flight and exercise, okay? And then the parasympathetic is often called the feed or breathe division because you use it every other time when you're just chilling, nothing's about to eat you, you're not super stressed out. Okay, so right now, which one do you think is in control of your heart? Parasympathetic, because your quiz is over, right? Right? And there's not a tiger in the room. So what your parasympathetic nervous system is doing to your heart right now is actively inhibiting your heart rate. It's saying, don't spend too much ATP, don't wear out your heart muscle, chill out, right? It's actively slowing it down. Good? But then a tiger walks in. Yeah? And we're all screwed if tigers get opposable thumbs. You know that, right? Tiger walks in, and what happens is I have different needs for my cardiac muscle, right? So what happens is I stop parasympathetic stimulation and I increase sympathetic stimulation and my heart rate goes up. Yeah? So I can turn it up, I can turn it down, I can put the accelerator on, I can put the brakes on. With skeletal muscle, just tell it what to do or leave it alone. But I don't want you to think that the sympathetic increases the activity of all tissues, because now I want you to think about the smooth muscle in your digestive tract, okay? If you've eaten breakfast, what do you think the smooth muscle is doing right now in your digestive tract? It's contracting, right? It's starting to the digestion process. That's still controlled by the parasympathetic nervous system, only this time the parasympathetic nervous system is giving a signal here that says speed up, and here that says slow down, right? Just based on where you need the resources right now, where you need to spend energy, okay? So, and then the tiger walks into the room, and then what do I need to happen to the smooth muscle in my digestive tract? I need to stop it. I have finite resources, right? And there's a freaking tiger in the room, right? So what happens now is it's still the sympathetic nervous system, but the sympathetic nervous system decreases activities of sort of these non-essential tiger getting away from tissues, right? Because if the tiger eats you, he can digest your breakfast for himself. Yes? Okay? So what is not true is what a lot of people say is that the sympathetic nervous system speeds up the activity of all tissues. That would be stupid because then you would burn out your nutrients and your resources and your oxygen. What it does is it speeds up the activities of the tissues that can help and it slows down everything else. That makes sense? Okay, so we will get to that in more detail later. Go ahead.
So, in that example, is the parasympathetic still active while the sympathetic is active? But it's
What
just like
happens
less?
is they kind of like, I say on versus off, but what happens is it's really up versus down.
Okay.
So when a tiger walks into the room, what happens is you decrease action potentials or electrical stimulations in the parasympathetic, and you increase them in the sympathetic. And then after you, like, for instance, oh, it's not a tiger, it's a guy in a tiger suit. right? Then you're like, okay, I am going to decrease sympathetic stimulation and increase parasympathetic stimulation, right?
Yeah,
That
because
makes
really
sense.
all of these are always going on, just different.
Right, in different proportions. Your body doesn't have very many ons versus offs. It has
Yeah.
lots of ups versus downs.
Okay.
So you can oversimplify it and teach it as on and off because it makes people understand it a little better. So you guys are all right with that?
Yeah.
Now this one, if you don't get this part, don't worry yet because I don't really expect you to. The rest of it, you will need to know by the time you have your first quiz, okay? Now let's briefly just change gears and talk about something that you have met with histology, and then we've got terminology to go with it right now. And I just want to talk about neurons generally, what neurons are like and what you can expect and how you can tell which direction information is flowing. And we'll get to Jeremy's question too. Jeremy? Yeah, Robert, your brother. Okay, I was like, I know there's two of them. I can't remember which one's which. Okay, so nervous tissue is primarily neurons and their processes, right? And then glial cells. We haven't learned the types of glial cells, but we will. We'll get to it at the beginning of Tuesday's lecture. For right now, I want to focus on the neurons. What is special about the neurons is that neurons are super unique in their capacity to do something that other cells can't do. They can take any kind of input and turn it into an electrical signal, which you can send. Okay? For instance, in your eyeballs, you are being bombarded by photons, and I have literally no idea what the hell a photon looks like. But I know what happens when the photon hits the retina of my eye is the retina converts that photon to an electrical stimulus which can send to my brain and be interpreted. Yes? Likewise, this right here is being, this pressure is being taken and converted into an electrical stimulus which I can send to my brain. So neurons have the capacity to take almost any kind of stimulus and convert it into something that can be interpreted by the brain or the body. Does that make sense? And they're really unique in their capacity to do that. The other thing about neurons is that they can communicate that to the next cell. So not only can the neurons of the retina of the eye take a photon and convert it into electrical stimulus, they can send it and then they can release a neurotransmitter that tells the next cell about the electrical or about the photon. Does that make sense? So because they can release neurotransmitters, they can also send the signal on, right? And they are the only tissue in the body that can do that can actually release neurotransmitters and actually send signals on. Does that make sense? In that way, anyway. So the other thing about neurons is that since they are amitotic after fetal development, because they've lost their centrioles, although they did find a few places in the brain in which they can go through mitosis, but mostly no. That means they have to live as long as you live. And I think the oldest person was 123 or 126. You know what the hell you would do at 126. I can't even imagine. I would hope that there was a list of accomplishments that was pretty damn impressive. So they have to live for as long as you live. You do start losing them as you age, but a lot of that's just due to poor cardiovascular health. If you can keep your cardiovascular system supplying your brain really well as you age, you won't lose your neurons very quickly. Go ahead.
I have a question about the neurotransmitter
Yeah.
example. It's still, integration still needs to happen before neurotransmitters are released.
No, integration is happening because neurotransmitters are released. So what's going to happen is, let's talk about vision for a second.
Yeah.
Smash with a photon, start an electrical stimulus, and then that neuron that has the electrical stimulus on the axon will dump neurotransmitters to tell the next neuron, which is part of the integration process. And then the next neuron will communicate to the occipital cortex of your brain, and it will say, oh, you just saw red, right? And that's all the integration process. It's all happening because of a succession of neurotransmitter releases between neurons. That okay? Okay. So yeah, it's relatively complicated if you're talking about multiple ones, but I'm about to show you an example of kind of that going on. So so you have the release of neurotransmitters. They're amitotic after fetal development. That's a really, really big deal because in addition to being amitotic, they're also very energetically expensive and also don't store any appreciable amount of oxygen. So that means that if, for instance, I had, at normal room temperature, lost arterial supply to my brain, yeah, then what's going to happen to the cells? They're going to die. And you can, at the very least, have a stroke, and they'll die in a region of your brain. If it's a region that's keeping you alive, you can die because of that. But then what is pretty much guaranteed in almost every region of your brain is that you're never going to get those cells back, right? They are gone. So they have an incredibly high metabolic rate, a pretty constant need for oxygen, and they pretty much prefer one nutrient over all others. They really, really only like glucose. And that is not the same with other tissues in your body. Other tissues in your body are sort of generalists about what they eat. They can eat glucose, they can eat a lot of other sugars, they can use fats to break down, and they can use proteins to break down. The brain's like, I am the pickiest little toddler that you ever heard, and I will pretty much only eat glucose. And as a matter of fact, I don't even care if the rest of the body is starved of glucose. I still want it all. I still want it all. So it's really, really particular. Now, it can burn a couple of other things, but it gets really pissed off if it has to. Like you can force it to burn ketones or ketone bodies, for instance, with diabetics. It's going to be mad. You're going to be stupid. Has anybody ever done the Atkins diet? Or any high protein, low sugar diet? What?
I'm kind of doing something like that right now.
Did you feel the change when your brain started getting mad because you weren't giving it enough carbs?
I have a really bad migraine today.
Yeah. So my husband and I cut out carbs every once in a while just because like we tend to like eat too many and we're both like do it at the same time. And I am so dumb and so mean during the process of switching over. And he's like, and I like literally was in tears one time. I was like, just want an apple. I just don't want an apple. He's like, eat an apple. What did you say, Charlie?
I have a migraine disorder, and I would get migraines like 4 times a week. And so my doctor actually told me to go on the keto diet because it's actually designed for people with epilepsy, and it helps create more fat stores for the myelin sheath.
Yeah, it flips the metabolic predisposition for your neurons, and they don't like being flipped. But
Yeah, no, I was really angry and
yeah,
crabby and stuff like that. But ever since I did that, then my migraines have disappeared,
interesting.
and then I'm not on Adderall. Like I still take Adderall for my ADD, but not as bad because I can focus more.
That's interesting. But the transition is really brutal. In addition, you smell really bad. Like it changed. I don't know if you've noticed that. Has anybody else ever done it? Or like a super high protein? So your breath smells really bad because the ketones, you can tell them in your breath, and then it comes out in your pores as well. So it's like you're sweating. You're just like, who that? Ugh, this is gross. I told my husband, we can just use this as birth control. So because we're like mean and we're stinky and we don't want to get anywhere near each other. Like, blah! Okay. So now let's sort of talk about her question a little bit by talking about what neurons are doing. This is a really, really simple loop. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at the neurons functionally. This one's going through the spinal cord and not the brain. It gets more complicated when you go through the brain, but let's just go through the spinal cord. So what I want to do is I want to talk about what the neurons are doing, and then I'll address the fact that some of these neurons look weird. Okay, some of them are strange looking. So during differentiation, a neuron will decide, and I don't know of any capacity to switch. A neuron will decide its functionality. It doesn't mean it hasn't occurred, but I don't know about it. So this neuron is going to carry information from skin receptors. Let's say something got tickled right here, and you responded by doing this. Okay? So it's going to carry information from skin receptors toward the spinal cord. So this neuron is sensory or what ferent? Afferent. Okay? And then this neuron right here is neither sensory nor motor. It is between them. This is the decision maker. This one is doing integration. Yes? This one is called an interneuron. It's between neurons, right? You have boatloads of these in your brain and your spinal cord because most of the ones in your brain and your spinal cord are not attached to muscles and they're not attached to sensory receptors. As a matter of fact, your brain has no sensation. That's why you can do like brain surgery awake, right? They're awake and they're talking to you. The bone has hella sensation, so you got to do that part when they're asleep, right? But then after they wake up, you can actually poke parts of their brain to see if you're taking things out that they actually need. So it doesn't have any sensory. I'll show you some videos of that when we get to the brain. What?
It's crazy.
It's so cool. Yeah. Okay, and then this one right here is going out to skeletal muscle. So this one is motor or what ferent? Deferent. But now let's add a little bit more detail because we can. Okay. This one is taking information from skin receptors toward the central nervous system. So it is, be more specific. It's blank afferent. Somatic afferent or somatic sensory. Does that make sense? This one is still an interneuron. It's not part of that discussion, right? And then this one is taking information out to skeletal muscle. So it is blank motor or blank efferent. Somatic motor. Yeah? Does that make sense? Okay. So you can look at those and see what it's doing. This is the simplest little reflex arc imaginable with one interneuron between them. But it ain't one interneuron when I'm like seeing a picture of an apple, right? And it's going through, the photons are hitting my eyeballs, the information's going in, it has to go to the visual cortex to identify it as red apple, it has to go to the language region so that I can pull up the word apple, right? And then it goes to other memory regions in my brain to remember my association of apple, like apples, delicious, apples, can't eat them with braces, apples, whatever, right? Does that make sense? So generally, when you're talking about it, there's boatloads of interneurons that goes to the brains, boatloads of them, right? Okay, so now let's go and address Jeremy's question. So now we have to talk about the fact that not all neurons look the same, and therefore you can get weird things where you expect axons and dendrites in different places. So the functional categories of neurons are the three that we just talked about: sensory, motor, or interneuron, afferent, efferent, or interneuron. By the way, the other name for an interneuron is an association neuron because it associates two neurons. Yeah? Okay, now if we look at structural categories of neurons, the structural categories of neurons they're named based on how many projections you have sticking off of the cell body, right? How many pokey things. I don't even care what the pokey thing is called, just how many are sticking off of the cell body. These are the most common neurons, and they're the only ones that you learned in histology so far. These are called multipolar neurons, a bunch of pokey things, right? More than you want to count, generally. This one has two, so it's called a bipolar neuron, and that one has one that branches, and that one is called a unipolar neuron. Yes, a unipolar neuron. Okay, so think these are the least common, these are intermediate, and these are the most common. So you're going to see these far more frequently. But this gets to, go ahead.
Is there a way to tell, so like since the labels were taken away on the bipolar neuron, the dendrite and the axon, there's no way to tell which?
There's no way to tell until you get into the close level histology, because the one that is dendrites will have receptors on it because it's gathering information, and the one that's an axon will have the capacity to release neurotransmitters. But you can't tell that unless you can get really, really close. But they are functionally different. It's just that from the gross anatomy or even basic light histology, light microscopy, you're not going to be able to see. So it would have to be labeled, or I would have to indicate it with arrows or something like that in order for you to know that. So it looks arbitrary at this level, but it's not functionally once you actually get down there. So let's go back to here for just a second. And so we can address his question. So now here is a unipolar neuron, and unipolar neurons are very often sensory, not always, but they're very often sensory. So what happens is I want this not out here where it's really delicate. I want it at least closer to the central nervous system. So that's why here it's better to use this type of neuron than a multipolar one, right? Because the cell body would be out here if it's multipolar. That makes sense? So just sort of based on the structural arrangement, you can use different ones where you are. So this is actually dendrites continuous with something that you distinctly call an axon when it gets here. It has some axon functionality there, but you don't even have to ask the neuron cell body about starting it. You're like, I'm just going to go by and I'm just like going to tell you what I did, right? So that's how you can end up with something that like has them at or near the central nervous system, even though the dendrites are there and the axon's there. Okay, so now what I'm going to do with each of these three, I'm going to ask you two questions about the neuron. I'm going to ask you the structural category of the neuron, and then I'll ask you the functional category of the neuron. Okay, so here, be as specific as you can and raise your hand, and I'll be nice to you, I promise. What functional category of neuron? Functional category of neuron is that? Be more specific. Somatic sensory. Somatic sensory. It is somatic sensory. Good. And next question is, What structural category of neuron is it? Unipolar, yes? That makes sense? Okay. Same questions. What functional category of neuron is this? Interneuron, exactly. And now what structural category of neuron is it? It's a multipolar neuron. Do you see all the processes? And then this one right here, what functional category is it? Somatic motor. Yes, somatic motor. Good. And what structural category is it? Not unipolar. Nope. Multipolar. Yes. You don't see the bipolar ones very often. They are actually in the retina of the eye in just a few little places, but they're not involved in this particular story. Does that make sense? So when you have a quiz, and you won't until Thursday, if I ask you structural category, I promise you I'll put all the functional ones in there too. I'll put all 6. There's 3 and 3, right? Because you need to know which word correlates to what. And the same thing with the other one. If I actually ask you structural category, I'll put all 3 structural and all 3 functional, so that you will be able to distinguish. So the biggest sort of impediment with the nervous system is being honest with yourself about what you know and what you don't know, and then getting to the point that you know it, right? Okay, so we'll stop there for today, and I will see you guys on Tuesday.